All right, everyone, I'm excited to introduce my next guest. He has produced and worked with some of the greatest entertainers of all time and TV shows, Fridays, Ellen. He's worked It's Scary Shandling Show. He's worked with, Robin Williams, An Evening at the Met. He's worked with Billy Crystal, Richard Lewis, George Carlin. If they're in entertainment, Vic has produced them. Welcome to the show, Vic Kaplan. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for contacting me.
My pleasure. Thanks for picking up. Vic, how did you come to work with every famous person in the world?
Well, it kind of started when I left ABC and I went to work for Dick Clark Productions, and this was around 1976. And at that time, there were quite a few variety shows and many comedy and variety producers were doing specials and series. And there was a lot of work, and I, stayed with Dick Clark, did all kinds of different kinds of shows, a lot of music, and then a live variety show, which included comedy and stand-up comedy. I met two producers, John Moffat and Bill Lee, while we were at Dick Clark, and they formed a company. They had a deal with ABC, and the part of the deal was to produce a late night comedy to compete with Saturday Night Live. And after a couple of pilots that I did with them, with a lot of different comedians doing sketch comedy, we got a pilot, and it was called Fridays, and it got picked up for a series. This was in April of 1980, I think, yes. And John Moffat and Bill Lee were the executive producers, and they brought me on. And I was called all sorts of things. I was an executive in charge of production. I was an associate producer. I was a producer, whatever. It was a blazing 52 episodes live with a lot of known pop music at that time. We had a lot of guest hosts that were from that era. I probably can't name them all, but I do remember that Lenny and Squiggy were part of that.
That's amazing.
That had the hosting. The shows were live, and when we debuted, it was an 11:30 show that was on after the local news. The show was doing very well. We had two budding stars coming out of that show, Larry David and Michael Richards. Shows were going along fine. And then towards the second season, ABC decided to put on a news show, a network news show at 11:30, and moved Fridays to midnight. And that wasn't taken so well. I mean, we worked really hard, and we were doing really well. And to come on after two news cycles, like you'd have the local news at 11 to 11:30, and then there was a network news show. I think it was with Ted Koppel, but it was an hour of news before you got to Fridays. So that kind of took some of the wind out of the sails, as you'd say, and our ratings kind of dipped. And towards the end of the run in that second season, we did like 2.5 seasons. We got the news from ABC that we were canceled. However, on that show, as for me, I got to meet a lot of comedy managers, comedy agents, and at that time there was a little thing called HBO that was budding. And
I've heard of it. I've heard of it.
And there was Showtime also, and the comedy managers that represented Fridays and a lot of the comedians that came on, we got to know. So I got to meet a lot of people, and all of a sudden, a lot of the comedians were selling shows to HBO and series. And I worked with John Moffat and Pat Lee, and they developed not necessarily the news. And we worked with them, and we got a series on. And what happened is that Chris Albrecht, who was an agent with ICM at the time. He got the job as the president of HBO. He comes out of comedy and started bringing producers along to do HBO specials and series. So there was seems to be a big stream of specials. I was really lucky to get on a lot of them, and the managers of Moffat Lee and me was the Brillstein company at that time. You know, Bernie was a powerful manager to have on your side, and working with him just expanded my chances of doing a lot of great things with comedians.
Fridays was a powerhouse. I mean, I remember that. I remember being, I forgot that Larry David came from there. I mean, I remember very specifically Michael Richards was big name there. And Jack Burns was the announcer. And
Yes, yes.
there was a lot of Andy Kaufman, I think, guest hosted a few
Mm-hmm.
times. A lot of big names. Rich Hall. This is so now you've left Dick Clark. Is the music that you did like Rick Springfield, Fleetwood Mac, Michael Jackson? Was that where is that in the time frame? Is that after Fridays?
Yes, it came after Fridays. Before Fridays, when it was with Dick Clark, I did a lot of the music specials and the American Music Awards and various specials with Dick Clark. And then John Moffat and Bill Lee produced them, and then they left to form their own company. Bernie Brillstein at that time was their manager and signed them to a deal with ABC. More music came. I mean, I can mention there were a Helen Reddy special. There were a lot of different kinds of things. And Captain and Tennille, of course.
Of course. These are all the classics. So did you get to hang out with Dick Clark?
I did. I found him to be a very, very powerful instinct in my career. I mean, he gave me a lot of support. There were a lot of times when it got, when very tense. He could be a Jekyll and Hyde. He could be mean at times, and he could be the most wonderful man that I've ever worked with. I got to do a David Soul special in London, and we didn't bring anybody to London other than me and the writer Robert Arthur and Dick Clark. It was just the three of us putting up a special in London, not knowing anybody, just making a few contacts, and working with Dick Clark on that particular level was quite an experience. It was everybody was hands on. I guess when I left Dick Clark, there was still more music with John and Bill until they got into the comedy aspect, and Bill passed away, and Pat Lee, his wife, stepped in and partnered with John to launch NNTN, which I was part of the original launch. From there, that turned into a highly successful series.
Two questions, two follow-up questions. One, what were the secrets of Dick Clark to stay so young? Did you witness it? Did he just like a lot of tomatoes or something? There had to have been something.
He didn't smoke. He never indulged. I know, he would have a glass of wine here and there. I mean, he was just a regular, not an indulgent eater, smoker. He was a workaholic. He constantly had, shows on the air, and a lot of people who were very successful in production went through the Dick Clark company. You served your 2 or 3 years there, and then you came out and you graduated into another world of to take your experiences and do a lot more in comedy and music at that time.
So the Dick Clark company was to producers what like Roger Corman was to directors. You did your time and then you went and became a big shot. All right, let me ask you a question, Vic. What makes, and I'll ask you the same question about comedy, but like what makes a very excellent music special? Like what is the secret to capturing a musical performance so that when you're watching it at home, it doesn't feel flat and it's like you feel you're there, and it's like, are there tricks to that trade?
Yes, but during that time, there were some extraordinarily great directors who did music in the 70s and 80s. It's nothing like today. It's nothing like you see on The Voice, or if you see a lot of the HBO music specials and Netflix music specials. It's a lot more sophisticated now. But back in that day, there were a lot of directors who understood and were very adept in putting music and picture together. And there was a group of them there at that time. I know they don't exist anymore, but there were a lot of network specials, and they were all different. They were mostly classic type, the ones with Barbara Streisand, and the ones with Perry Como and Andy Williams and stuff like that. But there were some really long lasting, good, great talent on them. John Denver had a series, and they were very special at that time. And I think the networks kind of dropped that, and those kind of music specials that went on to HBO and Showtime, and then new directors and new forms of putting music on TV developed until what it is today, which is amazing. What some of the directors can do with music. It feels very sophisticated camera work and brilliant lighting. That's what carried us in the beginning, but sooner or later we had to give way.
What would you consider some of the best musical performances captured on film during that time? It could be your favorites too. It doesn't.
I have to say it was Michael Jackson on the American Music Awards doing the moonwalk.
That's one of the greatest moments in the history of anything. I mean, I can, when he did that, I mean, it's like, that's like one of those moments where you're like, where were you when that happened?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the shows, there's Michael Jackson, there was Lionel Richie, there was some just really great talent, but most memorable is watching the moonwalk, and then seeing Thriller, that video. But
that video, yeah, that was John Landis, right?
yes,
Yeah, that was it's funny, like we live in a world where it's like everything's on demand. You forget when you had to wait for the world premiere. It was like, and you had to watch it when it was on or catch a special, whenever it was replaying on MTV. Such a different time. So of your concerts that you like, full concerts that you like, Kenny Loggins or Rick Springfield or
Fleetwood Mac. Oh my God. Yeah. It's that Fleetwood Mac for HBO was a very powerful concert. That group was just off the charts. They were amazing.
I love Fleetwood Mac. I just literally just bought Rumors on vinyl. It was my first DVD. It was my first CD I ever bought as well. Such a great. I mean, yeah, it's Fleetwood Mac.
Well, at that time, I jumped on a Stevie Nicks special. I had a sub in for one of the producers who had to leave the show, and Stevie's manager, and then that led to doing their HBO special.
Incredible. So I assume that was the classic lineup, though, right? That was all of them back then, because we're talking, they hadn't broken up 5 times.
Yeah. There was a pioneer director at HBO, Marty Callner, who developed his own HBO style that was different from what you would see on the network special from the 70s and 80s.
Keeping with TV for a second, and I definitely want to jump into comedy because there's so many. My goodness. So you worked on in some way the original Three's Company pilot, unaired pilot.
Yes. I was at ABC, and this was in 1976, and the producer of one of the producers of the Emmy Awards that I did was doing this pilot for ABC, John Ritter, and I was like a production manager for ABC. I was still working for ABC at the time, but they put me on the show, and everybody was so high about the show, the pilot that we shot. People would come up to me and say, "Hey, this goes. Would you leave ABC and come join us as as an associate producer. At that time, I was working for ABC for about 8 years. With Had a 2 years stint with the Army and 1 year in Vietnam, but came back to work with ABC. And I thought at that point that the Three's Company show was going to be my ticket to doing, freelance producing. To my shock, it wasn't picked up, and it was going to be recast. I think they recast the women. Don't remember exactly who was recast. I stayed back at ABC, and then Dick Clark and Bill Lee from Dick Clark gave me a call. I left ABC to go with them and not do the sitcom.
I wonder whatever happened to that sitcom.
Yeah, yeah, nice,
So that's
nice
interesting.
career.
So the version you made, everyone loved and thought that was the show, but then didn't get picked up. And then they reinvented it, shot a new pilot, which is what we all know.
The thing is that a lot of people have different eyes for casting, and throughout the years, I've gone through many table reads where for producers and executives, and there's just something that's just not right, and not everybody is 100% aboard with an actor or an actress. Sometimes, after you shoot a pilot and you edited it and you test it or whatever, a lot of people take a look and a lot of different opinions come out. And those unfortunate things happen where you don't get picked up and then they recast. Sometimes they recast and sometimes they cancel. So in this case, they recast and became a giant hit.
Oh, huge, huge,
Yeah.
huge. Yeah. Iconic even. All right. So now you're with Dick Clark, but then later, that's just one of your interesting TV credits. So it's Scary Shandling Show, which such a great show. Like,
Well,
wow, is that a great show, right? I mean, so groundbreaking. What was
Well, what happened? What happened there is before I did that show, I was getting a lot of stand-up specials from HBO and Showtime, and I met a manager. His name was Brad Gray, who was the manager of Gary Shandling, Bob Saget, Dana Carvey, Dennis Miller. At that time, after I did a Gary Shandling special for Showtime. It was called Alone in Vegas. And after that was produced, Brad joined Brillstein, which later became Brillstein Gray, and brought those four superstar comics to the Brillstein Company. And they all got HBO specials or Showtime specials. I was happy to do all of them. One thing led to another. The Shandling did another special, and then he and a great writer, Alan Zweibel, who was from Saturday Night Live, got together and wrote It's Gary Shandling Show pilot. That started. It was like in 1986 in the summer, and they picked up six episodes, and it was an instant success, although Showtime didn't have nearly the amount of subscribers that HBO did. But it was critically acclaimed. And then they picked up another six, and then it was 11, and then it became 72 more, which was astounding.
I remember watching that. I remember watching those Gary Shandling specials too. Gary Shandling to me was one of the funniest human beings. So
he and Alan could make you laugh all day long, working on the shows, no matter what the tensions were. They could give each other a look and whatever, and you would be laughing in the next minute or so.
that
They're the funniest people I work with, but also during that time I worked with Billy Crystal and on his specials before he got to do
Comic Relief?
live,
Oh, Saturday Night Live. Okay.
and we did an HBO special, and his I worked with his management company. It was Rollins, Jaffe, Mora, Bresner. They represented a lot of comedians too, and they also had a very good relationship with Chris Albrecht. So as you can see, I'm laying out here. There was like a birth of many comedians and specials that were launched at that time. I was really busy.
I mean, any one of those would have been like, wow, you worked with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it was like, you also worked with George Carlin. You produced one of his specials, or
another wonderful person. Great. I had there are a list that happened, and all I credit Chris Albrecht for putting together an amazing legion of comedians at HBO. I mean, there were just quite a few. Bob Saget got it. Dennis Miller during those days did two specials. One, we won these things called Ace Awards. Whatever they were, we won them, and it was because these comedy specials were written so funny and so produced pretty well, and they kept getting, becoming more and more. And to this day, I look on at Netflix, and they're still coming out with more and more comedy.
a lot of comedy on Netflix, an
But the
abundance.
birth at that time was that there were just the people that that were at Brillstein Gray and Rollins Jaffe. They were just brilliant comedians. And then doing Robin Williams at the Met was an unbelievable experience for me. The show was supposed to be done in June, and then it moved to August. And for some reason, it was supposed to be June, and it was going to be done in Los Angeles. And then it was moved to the Met in New York. Robin sold out two shows in like 6 hours, 2 days. I think it's 3,000 seating capacity. Left us no time for rehearsal or lighting or what. I mean, it was just jammed, and it was one of the most historic specials that has been produced. I mean, he was.
Was that
Uh,
one of the harder ones that you did, in the sense that
well, it
he's
was
on a standstill kind of comedian?
it wasn't that it was hard. It was that it was Robin can play any venue and be great, but to do that one where there was no setup time because venue didn't allow us to get in early enough to get the set and lighting. Then the director had no rehearsal, and then Robin just did it, and it was just genius. Showed off his greatness.
So amazing, so amazing. Did you Father Guido Sarducci?
Yes, he's from out of Saturday Night Live at that time. I forget it whether it was Showtime or HBO. He wrote this special. It was like an oh by the way, here we go again. Let's go. And I met with him, and I think Steve Binder, who was known for directing Elvis and doing a lot of spectacular kind of things. We're doing this little HBO special with him and Don Novello. I think we had him on Fridays. We got he was just real easy to work with and very collaborative.
And then Richard Lewis. You did a couple
Oh,
specials with Richard Lewis.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That was sad to hear. He was extraordinarily funny, crazy neurotic, but fun. The biggest thing I can say about him, he'd come down after a performance. He was still a kind person, just a quality person to work with. It appeared like things were crazy, but after all was said and done, it wasn't. And he was very approachable and very open. And it's like when I see his character on Curb, it's kind of that character there.
Very cool. And then Harry Anderson. Was that one rough?
This is good, and it's getting me sad. I love
Oh,
Harry. We did a couple of specials. One was where we did it at the Comedy Magic Club in Hermosa Beach, and that was a very small house, but an incredible audience that loved Harry Anderson. And he did that needle in the arm trick, which was classic. That special did very well for Showtime, and then we got another special and then another NBC special which was with Chinese acrobats. So it was like sideshow. Harry was very into, the sideshow aspect of comedy, and he and Jay Johnson and I all partnered together to produce that show.
He was brilliant. I mean, I loved him when he was just kind of guesting on Cheers. He'd show up on Cheers every now and then.
Yeah,
And I mean, Night Court obviously is brilliant. Love
and
Harry
and
Anderson.
in Dave's World, he did an amazing job on Dave's World. Again, I was Harry offered me to work with him on that show, and one of the most difficult choices I had to make was to turn down that series because I was in negotiations to work on Ellen, and to my surprise, they signed me up to 4 years, which is unheard of now to give a producer 4 years. It's and I had to call Harry and tell him, we stayed friends, and we, still, had some of the greatest times. I mean, he's always funny, and he partnered with Jay Johnson, who's also a good friend of mine, who helped us produce the shows, and the two of them were just a force to work with.
He was wonderful. Yeah, that was Dave's Role was the show about Dave Barry, right? And
Yes,
then I,
yes,
and I also remember because it was a Billy Joel theme song.
yes, yeah.
Oh man. Okay, wait, since you brought it up, let's pivot to Ellen for a second. All right, so you were at Ellen. I interviewed Dava Savell, and we talked a lot about the puppy episode, which happened during the time you were there. What that's the episode, just to catch everyone up, where Ellen came out. It's considered one of the most famous and groundbreaking episodes of television, period. What was it like being part of that show at that moment? Because I know there was the decisions and then the aftermath and then all that.
Well, there has been a lot said, and I'm sure one thing you'll agree with me is the more stories get told, the more unreal they get. And for the most part, it happened in a very matter of fact way. Ellen pitched to the writers first an idea where she would come out, and it took time to evolve. There were a lot of meetings about it, and Dava and Mark Driscoll and Jonathan Starr, I mean, and Tracy, they all collaborated, but it took time. And then there was a draft, and then there was another draft, and then there was all this drama about the draft was getting to a radio station or things like that, and there were all sorts of conspiracy things about what was going to happen with the show. But it wasn't immediately picked up. But between August and I think we produced it in March, but it took a long time and a lot of perseverance, and finally the script became great, and Ellen, we were able to, with our casting director, Tammy Bellig, book these amazing guest stars. But it was the script and, having the talent that we had there working. But Ellen was the force behind it from day one. It was it was just a mention, an idea, and it's something she wanted to do, and then it steamrolled into a great script and a great production. It was just one of those shows that just developed into, I think, a one of a kind of event. I went with Ellen to get a Peabody Award in New York, which was one of the highlights of my career, to accept that with her. And there's a lot has been said afterward about about Will and Grace and a lot of the shows that are happening now. But it took a lot to get that one episode done. It was backbreaking work on the part of getting the script right. The writers really dug in, not, and it was disappointing sometimes to them because they really had to work really, really hard while we were producing 20 some odd other shows at the same time, weekly shows. But, again, we got 44 million people watched it. It's one of the highlights of my career.
Amazing. Well, it must feel good to be part of something that definitely touched so many people's lives. It's not just a critical success for the sake of it being so great of an episode, but that, many people, that opened up a lot for a lot of people finally see that.
I had friends who were at NBC, executives who were developing Will and Grace at the time. One of the executives was a friend of mine, and I was just giving him some hints on what the do's and don'ts were as we were going along. There was a lot of standards and practices issues, and NBC was different than ABC standards, and it got involved, but it was not easy. It was not an easy road. Like today, it seems like it's nothing to produce a comedy with gay characters.
You led the path. You you walked so others could run. Well, you were part of the team, I should
Part of it,
say.
yeah. I mean, I think I
Yeah.
think again, Dava and Mark and the writing staff were incredibly
No,
steadfast in keeping up.
they were wonderful. So I know that was a highlight. So maybe this isn't the Get Smart reboot.
Yeah.
Talk to me about like when they're trying to. It's one thing I know the TV movies; those were a thing, where they bring it back for a couple hours and stuff like that. But this was a reboot, had a bunch of the original cast, Barbara Feldon, Don Adams. Is there an excitement about that? Because
You forgot one character, and who was the Get Smart? It was Andy Dick.
oh, and well, right, yeah, Andy Dick, but he was the new one, right?
He
He's
was the
like,
new one, and I don't think he really. I don't know if this was his cup of tea. I think when news radio came on, he was more comfortable in doing that. No, the Get Smart reboot, like a lot of reboots, it was 6 episodes and just didn't have time. It was not the kind of budget where we had 13 or 14 writers, or we had a couple of consultants who did the original Get Smart, and Barbara Feldon, I think, did a guest on it. It just didn't catch, and it was on Fox, and didn't catch on at all.
so it was just one of those because some of the trivia you read is like they knew it was done before they even aired it, which has got to be a bummer because like it's always hard. Like even like with the Night Court, we were talking about Harry Anderson earlier. Like with the Night Court reboot, it's like can't you just make something that's kind of in the same genre? I know everyone's stuck on IP and they need IP to like make things go, but it's like it's hard to re-grab magic from something that was so amazing.
Yeah, and Don Adams was a lot older, and his jokes were a lot older. The things that he did that were funny as Maxwell Smart, in the old series, just weren't didn't catch on with the audience when we did the reboot.
Missed it by that much.
And
All
he would
right.
use that, yeah.
And then Out of This World with Donna Pesco was another show that you did. And Burt Reynolds had just a voice. He never actually appeared.
That show was some of a friend of mine the executive producer, Bob Booker, who sometimes it was a syndicated show, and sometimes one of the things about the producers that I worked with in the 70s and 80s, and this was before the studios owned the shows, they were really inventive, and they did the creating. They didn't have a lot of executives telling them what to do or whatever, but they would come up with the ideas and be the force behind the creative process. Today, it's homogenized with there are a lot of creative executives, and there's testing, and there's this. But Bob Booker developed the show, and he came up with this idea: what about getting Burt Reynolds to do the voice from the heavens? And it was the key that kind of made it into a series that a lot of different kinds of audiences got into. And I think we produced about close to 80 episodes. It was very much of a success in syndication.
Amazing.
But
And
that
then,
voice that was his idea, and it got the show, I think, sold, and I think it sold the audiences because a lot of the audiences started to catch on. It was Burt Reynolds, who was also popular at that particular time.
yeah, Burt at one point was really hot. I think he was on
Yeah,
Evening Shade even around that time too, or something. Billy Crystal, speaking of Billy Crystal from earlier and Robin Williams, you also did at least a couple comic reliefs, which were the greatest shows ever on HBO.
yeah.
When those would come on,
Comic relief was an idea that was spurned by Bob Zamuda and Chris Albrecht at HBO. And the idea came to me. Chris said, "What if we do this telethon from Los Angeles, New York, England, or London?" And when he started talking to me about something like that, I started to get faint. I mean, that's the idea of putting 5 stages together in locations and transportation just became a nightmare. But we finally settled in just doing it in LA. But the HBO machine for comedy at that time brought in everybody. All the comedians came and donated their time, brought their A game to the show. We did. I think it was in March of '86 when we launched it, and there was, that was a time when HBO and Showtime were starting to build up their comedy stable.
yeah, those were some of the best. I remember comic reliefs, like just always loving when those came on.
To get Billy, Robin, and Whoopi to host was the best.
The three of them were, it was that powerhouse trio. I mean,
Right,
because they were really friends in real life, all three of them, right? They
right.
really adored each other.
John Moffat and Pat Lee also were working close with HBO, and it seemed they were brought in to shore up all bringing in a lot of the talent and the staff and writers, and it became a great show to show your comedy on while you're helping out the homeless.
Right. Yeah, they did a lot of good, lot of good. On HBO, you also did in the mid 2000s Lucky Louie with Louis C.K. That
Yes.
was, I remember that being great, never understanding why it got canceled so fast because it seemed like it was good. You know what I mean? It was different. It was like, had like an old school set and all that kind of stuff, but it was like,
I love the script. I met with Louie and we got picked up for 12 shows after the pilot. The pilot script was Louis wrote was great. The Cats was great. This was something that Louis wasn't used to working on a sitcom. It's different than doing your own material. We had a lot of great writers, and some of the scripts were really really good. The production was very stark, as it was. It was a lot like The Honeymooners, and HBO wasn't really used to multi-camera. It was a multi-camera comedy. We had a live audience. We didn't do any shows that were just canned laughter. It was all audience laughter, and that's the way Louis wanted it. Some shows did. Towards the end, the writers, on a sitcom, you can't produce every show to be great, and I think that HBO learned that you're going to have some scripts that are great, some that are not, and some that just didn't work. But I think the overall multi-camera look and the feel of the show and what the show was, it was kind of raw. I didn't get 100% support of HBO, and it was a big disappointment. When we were canceled. It was really hard to accept because most shows at that time at HBO didn't get canceled in their first run, but we did, and
well, maybe did it make up for it that you got to work with Zendaya? She's like the hottest thing right now. Like she's just like on fire. So you worked
well,
Casey
well,
Undercover on.
here's what happened is after Louis' show went down, I kind of this was in 2008,
2007. Okay.
7 or 8, yeah, and then I retired. I felt that I was at a time where I wanted to spend some time with my son was playing baseball for University of Texas, and I worked a lot and never spent a lot of time, enough time. I kind of retired, and then my wife and I, we moved to Sherman Oaks. We lived in Santa Monica for 25 years, and the kids all left the house, and so we downsized, and we moved into our home in Sherman Oaks. And on the first night, I went down to Pavilions to buy a bottle of wine, and I ran into a writer that I knew from Ellen, and he was an executive producer at Disney, and he was doing a show with Zendaya at the time. And he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm golfing, and I'm retired now." He says, "No, Adam Bennett at Disney is looking for a producer, and you have to pick up the phone and call him." So he calls him on the phone while I'm checking out. He says, "I'm standing here with Vic Kaplan, and all he's doing is playing golf." Hands me the phone. He says, "Can you come to my office on Monday? I want to talk to you about a show." I didn't know how to say no, and I started a 5 year, 5.5 years run with Disney, and ended up working with the writer I met with Ellen to do Zendaya's series. We knew she was going to become a superstar. I mean, she's just elegant, smart. She was already planning. Her parents were wonderful. Her support system was great, and she signed with CAA, and she did all the right things. We used to let her out to go to the Met Gala, where she could show off her new glamorous dresses and things. And but we knew all along she was getting offers, and she had movies coming, and then, as you know now, it exploded. But it was something we could all see, and we were just helping her get through this last Disney series. But what happened with this series is Disney wanted a lot of Zendaya, so we did 82 episodes in 3 years. How we did that? After that was over, I was 72 years old. I was tired, and I said, "This is enough. That's been it."
Well, going out on a Zendaya series, that's not a bad way to go. It's hilarious to me that you just happen to wander into that store and bumped into your old pal, and that's
Yeah.
what sparked your Disney career. Otherwise, who knows? Maybe you'd be
Well,
like,
I had, the Disney series with Ellen. I spent 4.5 years over at Disney, and this was just a break, and then
right.
just happened again.
It's amazing. So many amazing stories. And I know there's like a million more, but Vic, I so appreciate you hanging out with me, taking a break
Yeah.
from your now confirmed retirement to hang out with me and chat with
Oh,
me.
I'm definitely confirmed. I can say for sure. My son is a producer at Disney now, so he's got the baton.
He's
It
got the baton, carrying on the Kaplan charm over there. Awesome. Vic, thank you so much. This was amazing.
was good talking to you.